It was a sunny Saturday morning, the day you expect to spend relaxing in your backyard. I had just fired up the grill, the smell of marinated chicken filling the air, when I noticed three unfamiliar people standing near my fence. They held clipboards and cameras, snapping pictures of my backyard like they were surveying it. I walked over to ask what was going on, and that's when one of them, a woman in a crisp white blouse, handed me a letter. It was from the HOA. The letter stated that my newly built deck was in violation of community guidelines and must be removed within 30 days. No warning, no conversation, just a direct order. At first I thought it had to be a misunderstanding. My deck had been approved by the city, built by licensed contractors, and followed every safety regulation. But as I kept reading, I realized the HOA was claiming that part of my backyard was actually community property, and therefore I had no right to build anything there. I called the HOA office immediately, hoping this was a simple mistake. The receptionist barely let me speak before saying, "The board's decision is final. You can appeal if you wish, but fines will begin at $200 per day if the deck isn't removed." That was when my blood boiled. They weren't just wrong, they were confident in being wrong, and I wasn't about to let them push me around. That night I pulled out my property deed, the survey map from when I purchased the house, and any document I could find. I stayed up until 3 a.m. comparing measurements, property lines, and easement agreements. And then I found it, the detail that would change everything. Not only did I own my backyard, but according to the original land deed from decades ago, my property extended beyond the fence into what the HOA was calling community space. In fact, I owned a strip of land that ran behind several houses on my block. The next morning, I called a property lawyer I knew from college. I explained the situation and emailed him the documents. By noon, he called back almost laughing. "They have no case," he said. "In fact, if they've been using that land for HOA activities, they might owe you compensation." That was when I realized this wasn't just about my deck. This was about years of the HOA abusing power on land that wasn't theirs. And my backyard became a place where neighbors would gather, barbecue, and laugh about the time the HOA got taken down. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting, which was scheduled for the following week. I walked in with a large folder under my arm, my lawyer sitting beside me, and my phone recording everything. They didn't even let me sit down before the president. Began reading a motion to fine me for the deck. That's when I stood up, placed the property documents in the middle of the table, and told them to read. The room went quiet. One board member leaned over the papers, his face turning pale as he realized what they showed. The president tried to argue, claiming the documents must be outdated, but my lawyer calmly pulled out certified copies from the county records office, stamped and dated. There was no mistake. Not only was my deck completely on my land, but the so-called community property behind my house, where they had been storing maintenance equipment and even charging residents for upkeep, was legally mine. The murmurs in the room grew louder. One neighbor whispered, "Wait, so all those fees we paid for maintaining that area?" And another cut in, "They weren't even allowed to touch it." You could feel the shift in the room. The board members looked cornered, like they'd been caught with their hands in the cookie jar. The president tried to save face, suggesting we work something out. But my lawyer made it clear. The HOA would issue a formal written apology, remove any mention of violations from their records, and pay for any legal costs I incurred. If they refused, we would sue for harassment, trespassing, and misuse of funds. By the end of the meeting, they had no choice but to agree. Within a week, I received a signed apology letter and confirmation that all charges and threats were dropped. But the story didn't end there. Word spread around the neighborhood, and soon other homeowners started digging through their own property records. What they found was shocking. The HOA had been overcharging residents for years, billing them for community maintenance on land that was privately owned by individual homeowners. Several residents filed complaints, and within months, the HOA president and 2 board members resigned. The remaining members voted to slash HOA fees in half, and new rules were passed to ensure the board could never make such claims without verified proof. My deck stayed exactly where it was, and my backyard became a place where neighbors would gather, barbecue, and laugh about the time the HOA got taken down. The best part? That strip of land behind the houses, the one they thought they owned, became a small community park. Not an HOA park, but my park. I allowed neighbors to use it freely, no fees, no fines, no drama. It became a symbol in our neighborhood that sometimes you have to stand your ground, because the moment you give in to unjust authority, they take more than they're entitled to. So here's my advice. If the HOA ever comes after you, don't just take their word for it. Get the facts, check your property lines, and if you're in the right, don't back down. Because the truth is, the only power they have is the power you let them have. Have you ever had to fight back against an unfair HOA? Subscribe to the channel for more real stories like this one.